Pinball circuit activated.
Going to get started on clear coating, and I just wanted to make a point of why I clear coat. So you could leave it like this. This looks perfectly good. I think it's a good job overall. I think it came out nice. You can see there's a sheen difference. So for example, this yellow and the blue and the red actually are all gloss. And then like this green is matte and the white is matte, okay? So once I clear coat this, it's gonna bring all of those sheens to the same level, and it's gonna bring the art together a lot more. The one thing you have to also watch out for is these little ridges of paint, because with red especially, or yellow, you have to spray more to get it to cover, so you're gonna get a ridge. Now, if I wasn't gonna clear coat this, I would just leave it alone and move on with life. But since I'm clear coating it, what I'm gonna do, some people will try and ease this edge with a little sandpaper, and you would use like 600 grit or maybe something like that. What I'm gonna do with this, I think, is I'm gonna try and clear it first and then see what it looks like after it levels out. And I'm gonna try and get 2 good coats of clear on this. And then if I need to sand the clear to flatten it out before I do a final clear coat, I'm gonna do that. This is the clear that I use, Varathane Ultimate Crystal Clear, okay? Now this is semi-gloss, and this is a little bit of an experiment. I've been using satin finish, which I have liked on the 2 machines I've used it on because it helps to hide these little ridges because it's satin. I like the idea of a semi-gloss finish, so I'm gonna try this and see if it works, and if it doesn't, I'll top coat it with satin and be done with it. So we'll see how the semi-gloss looks. So this is the first coat of poly. You can see it goes on milky. Don't stress out, it dries clear. But what I wanted to point out, so hopefully you can see, there's some pinholing, okay? And that is why I do, this one's pretty good. See all that? So that's why I do these vertical, at least for the first couple of coats. Because this first coat, you're gonna see the pinholing, and then what we're gonna do is we will let this dry, and we'll come back and sand it back just a little bit with a hand, like some 400 grit or 600 grit sandpaper. And then when we respray that, it'll fill in those pinholes. And if you do it with the cabinet vertical, with this surface vertical, you're gonna get runs because you do have to put a decent amount of product to fill those pinholes in. So this was coat 1 of probably 3, if not 4, we'll see. But the first couple of coats I always do with the surface horizontal, so I can really get a lot of the material in there and get it to level out. And then after that, once you get the pinholes fixed, you can do the subsequent coats with the cabinet, you know, up on sawhorses and with the surfaces vertical, because you're not going to be putting on as much for those final coats. But we've had what Bob Ross likes to call a happy accident. I call it a mistake. But I think I'm going to learn from it. So I sprayed the polyurethane this morning, and I got, you can see here, a bunch of, I'm trying to get it where you can see, fish eyeing going on. It's really bad down here. You guys can see that. So, that is almost always a problem with surface prep, and there's a residue here that's on the surface, and you can see there's more of it right over here on this part. Pretty pebbled up, right? So I was thinking about it, and I was like, what would be leaving residue on the cabinet that a water-based polyurethane wouldn't like? And I dawned on me that I had wax paper over these towels. So my suspicion is that because if you look at it, it's like, you know, right here, which is kind of where the sawhorse was sitting, and right here, which is where the sawhorse was sitting. So I think what I need to do is try and clean off the wax residue as best I can from this area and then respray it. And I might just have to flood it and then try and sand it back. I don't think it's unrecoverable. I'll get it fixed, but definitely a learning process. And I'm definitely going to have to figure out a different way to pad these sawhorses in the future, because that's a problem. This is the third game I've used polyurethane on. I had a little bit of fisheye problem with Harlem Globetrotters, but it wasn't nearly this bad. I don't know if it was just the paint reacting with it or what. I mean, I'm just not sure. But bottom line is, you know, we learn, we move forward. That's how we get better at things. So I'm trying to be positive about it, and we'll see if we can get it fixed and get it resprayed and get things better. Update. This is after coat 2. So the good news is it is looking better. I'm going to kind of side, try and get it to where you can see. So we do it this way. There we go. So if you look here, there is still some, but it's much better. And so what I did was I sanded this back, the first coat, and I wasn't able to get it completely flat because I was a little concerned about burning through into the actual paint. So I sanded it as flat as I felt like I could and then sprayed another coat on. And it seemed to cover better. It didn't separate apart like it did the first time, but as it dried, it kind of sunk a little more into the areas, which I guess you expect. So this is in the current process of curing. It's been about 12 to 14 hours since I sprayed it. I'm gonna let this cure for at least 24 hours, and I'm gonna try and sand it completely flat next time, and then spray one final coat, and I think we'll be okay. So, all right, we are back in the workshop. It's been about a week since I posted or did a video, and that is because work has been crazy and this cabinet has given me problems. So I'm just going to try and catch you guys up on what I've done to get this cabinet to what I consider an acceptable level. It's not perfect, but it's about 95%, you know, there. And I think it's at this point, you know, good enough to move forward with. So as I mentioned before, when I put the polyurethane on this, it had a reaction with the red and blue specifically. The other colors were fine. It was just red and blue. I thought initially it was because of the wax paper that I was using as kind of a buffer with the cabinet, but I don't think that's the case after getting more experience with it, because the other side did the same thing and it was much more diffuse. So what I did to get it to an acceptable level was I basically put 2 heavy coats on this and then sanded it back lightly, put a 3rd heavy coat on, and sanded the whole thing flat. I used my random orbit sander and 600 grit sandpaper initially just to go over it, because the first 2 coats I really did not want to burn into any of the color paint. I ended up having a little bit of burn in or burn through on a couple little spots that I had to touch up, but it wasn't that bad. And then once I got it thick enough, the 320 grit on the random orbit sander was able to get it basically flat. There are a few little spots, if you look, where you can still see a tiny little divot, but it's not noticeable enough to mess with. And the problem is that this polyurethane has to cure for at least 24 hours before it can be sanded. So, you know, when you're doing 3 or 4 coats of polyurethane and 24 hours and then sand and then 24 hours and sand, I mean, obviously that takes a lot of time. Hence why I've not posted or recorded a video in a week. So we have finally gotten this cabinet to the point where I am okay with it. Again, as I said when we were stenciling, no stencil job or cabinet that I've ever done has been 100% perfect. I don't expect them to be 100% perfect, but if you remember back to where we started, this cabinet is a million times better than it was when we started. So I'm going to go ahead and start reassembling this cabinet today, and that's going to be the plan for today, is hopefully to get everything reassembled, get the head back on it, and maybe even get boards in the head and that sort of thing. I'm going to be replacing the ground braid in the cabinet as well, and getting everything kind of spiffed up inside so that we are ready to start on the play field, hopefully tomorrow, if I can get the cabinet all done today. I've installed leg protectors on the corners, which I highly recommend you do. They're not very expensive, and they do a great job, because if you don't do this, all that work that you did to remove the dents from the legs will be nullified, because you're going to get more dents, and not only that, you're going to break out whatever Bondo or sealer or filler, whatever it is that you used. So, leg protectors. Just showing quickly what I'm doing with the ground braid. So I'm replacing all the ground braid. I removed this little fitting from the old braid and soldered it into the fresh one. And then all I do when I do ground braiding is I've left the old braid in, okay? And I'm just gonna trace it. And I'm just gonna go exactly along and put it exactly where it was. And that's the easiest way I've found. I know some people will pull it all out at when they're doing the cabinet and then put it all back in. But to me, it's easier to just leave it in and trace it as I go. So I get on with that. Okay, regraining stainless. So these are the original side rails. You can see where we're starting. They're pretty scratched up. They're pretty dirty. So a new set of side rails costs about $100, which is the easier and more expensive way to do this. If the side rails aren't too bent up, I like to try and save them. It's cheaper, and it's not as wasteful. I've already removed the double-sided tape from the back and then cleaned off all of the adhesive with a combination of Goo Gone and a sanding wheel, basically. So that's all good on the back. So once we get these done on the front, I can reinstall the double-sided tape and get these on the machine. So what I do, and I'm not saying this is the end-all be-all best way to do it, it's the way I do it. Other people may do it differently. If there's a better way, please let me know in the comments. I go with a progression of sandpaper grits on my regular random orbit sander. And the idea is to try and get this down to from deep gouges and stuff to a bunch of uniform random scratches. And then I use a combi wheel, a 3M combi wheel, to get the final grain in. So this is 120. I've also got 220 and 320 grit paper here. And I could go up to 600 if I wanted to. I might, I don't know, we'll see. Let's see what happens. So first thing is just go over everything. And again, we're just looking to get the old scratches out. Okay, so that is after 320 grit. I've got up to 3000 grit if I want to, but I think what I'm going to try and do now is combi wheel it and see what it looks like. What I've got is a combi S wheel that I believe is fine grit, as I recall. These are really hard to find now. And if you find them, they're really expensive, so I've been using this one for a while. You can find the medium grit ones, which is this one, pretty easily, and you can just feel the difference. This one I use for, like, again, removing, like, adhesive from the backs of things. This puts too coarse of scratches in the metal, so I don't use this one. So we're going to use this guy and see how we do. And the key here is you want to just go as parallel as you can to your surface. So that's kind of where you get to initially. And then what I'll probably do is do a little bit more finish work on it, and a little bit, I might do just a few little passes with real fine grit sandpaper. Again, 600 grit or so, maybe one straight shot down, and see if I can get it a little smoother. But I mean, for most purposes, that's pretty good. I've also heard of some people putting a little coat of wax on here just to even it out some, and I may try that too, I don't know. So that is how I regrain a stainless rail, and I will show you it on the machine here in just a moment. The glass channel's been installed. I like to put a couple of little staples in just to hold it in place, make sure it doesn't move or shift or anything. I also I save these as best I can when I remove them, and then I just clean them real good with warm soapy water, clean them out, and they're good to go. Okay, installation of side rail. So this is double-sided 3M tape, okay? I think it's actually Scotch, but it's the same stuff. And what I did was I ran it down the side, and you'll see I've left a tag here. So what this is going to allow me to do is install the rail, make sure it's in the right spot, and then once it's in the right spot, I will pull this tag, pull this backing off, and install it. Don't try and install this with the backing removed, because it'll stick down and you're going to be in the wrong spot. So you want to make sure you locate your bolts first and make sure that your flipper button's in the right spot and everything's good, and then you can pull this and install it. All right, so I've installed the front bolt, the button, and the rear bolt. So now what we do is we take our little tag and hopefully pull it off. This one's pretty tight. I'm going to loosen that and get that little bit last piece out. But then what you do is you're just going to push it down your little seat. Just like that. Now you have an installed rail. Okay, it's been about 10 days since I last recorded a video, and that is because this thing has been a bit of a pain in the butt. Work got busy, and the cabinet polyurethaning was a little more involved than I had originally expected. As I showed in the previous video, there was an issue where the polyurethane had some kind of a reaction or didn't like flowing well over the blue and red Montana paints specifically. The other colors were fine. I did not have an issue with yellow, green, or white. It was only blue and red. And I originally thought it was related to the wax paper I was using over the sawhorses to keep from getting indentations in the base coat, or the paint from the towels when I was flipping it back and forth stenciling it. But the other side did the exact same thing, and it was much more of a diffuse thing. And so it wasn't the wax paper. So I still don't know exactly what it was. I don't know if it was a sheen issue, because the Montana white is a high gloss or gloss sheen. But the thing is, the yellow that I used was also Montana white. So you would think if it was the yellow, if it was the gloss or something about the Montana white, it would have done it to all the colors, not just blue and red. So I'm still at kind of a loss as to exactly what happened, but we are at a point where the cabinet's back together. I'm going to take you guys through and show you everything that I've done over the last 10 days. It's been a bit of a slog, but we got there. And I guess the lesson here, if you're new to restorations, is just keep going. Kind of like Dory and Finding Nemo, just keep swimming. Don't get discouraged. Resist the urge to, quit. If you need to take a day off, take a day off. Clear your mind, clear your frustration, come back to it, look at it with fresh eyes, keep pressing forward. So what I ended up doing with this cabinet side, and I've gotten it to what I would consider 95% there. There's a couple little spots if you get real close with a light at the right angle that you can still see a little divot, but you know, the reality is at some point when you're doing these machines, you have to realize that people are going to walk up to this machine and they're going to look at the cabinet for maybe 10 seconds and they're going to go, wow, cool, and then they're going to play the game, right? So I tend to fall into the trap myself of getting very obsessive with the cabinet and the paint. And the reality is there's a point at which you're just not getting much more juice for your squeeze, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's like you're putting all this effort in and you're fixing tiny, tiny little details that no one's going to see. So I know they're there, and if you told me to point out all the flaws in the clear coat, I could point them out all to you, but it's to a point where it's not worth messing with anymore. So what I ended up doing, what seemed to work the best if you're going to do polyurethane, is what I did on the second side, which was spray what I would call a medium coat. So the first coat is a mist coat. The second coat goes down immediately after as a second kind of medium coat. Let that dry for about 2 hours. And that's the outside of the recoat window for this particular brand of polyurethane. It says you can recoat within 2 hours. Then I came back, and this was all done again with the cabinet on sawhorses with the side I'm coating up. Do not do this with it vertical because you're going to get runs like crazy because you've got to put a lot of product on. So do it with it, with the surface you're coating horizontal, okay? And so I waited 2 hours. I came back and I did another second, I guess it would be sort of technically a third, but it's really a second heavier coat. And what I noticed was that the areas that were kind of fish-eyeing or not adhering as well, whatever you want to call it, it tended to flow in there a little bit better, I think, because there was a little, micro layer of polyurethane that had gotten in that area, whether it just be a few, particles of it or whatever, but it was able to kind of break up the surface tension enough that it flowed over it better. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And I let that cure for 24 hours. Then I did a light sanding with 600 grit sandpaper, and I used 600 grit because I didn't want to burn into the spray paint with more aggressive sandpaper because it was still a pretty thin top coat. And that was really just to give the polyurethane something to stick down to. If you're going to hand sand it, which you could do, you could probably use 400 grit and hand sand it, and you're not going to get into the stuff, to your paint underneath. I did have a couple of areas where it burned through. I fixed most of them. There was 1 or 2 areas that were very minor that I didn't think were worth fixing. And then once I had sanded it back with 600 grit, I did a third heavy coat. I let that cure for 24 hours, and then I went back and sanded it with my random orbit sander and 320 grit sandpaper. And that was aggressive enough to level out all of the issues, and I just went over the whole thing, and it was real easy to see what areas were low, and I just leveled it all out and got out, again, 95%. There were a couple that were pretty deep that I didn't get all the way to because I was concerned I was going to burn into the color paint, but I got it pretty close to there. And then I did a final heavy coat after cleaning it with some simple green and a tack cloth, simple green, a rag, and then a tack cloth. Did a final heavy coat, let that cure, and I was happy with that. So that's basically what I did on all of the cabinet. The head actually did better than the cabinet for some reason. I didn't really have a lot of issue with the head. I don't know why. Again, it's a mystery. But the head actually, I just did 2 kind of heavier coats, and it was fine. The front, I was able to get away with 2 coats without sanding too much in between because it didn't have the same reaction. So I did all that, and I resurfaced the rails. I've got a video on that coming, and then I'm going to walk you through everything I did. So let's check it out. All right, handheld mode. Obviously, the legs and coin door are still at the powder coaters, so I'm waiting on those. I'll get those installed as soon as I get them, hopefully sometime this week. I polished and cleaned the shooter rod plate, so that looks good. Here's the front that you guys have seen already in a previous video. You can see that my little start button came out quite nicely. There's a little dust there. Clean all that. This lock bar acceptor, I just cleaned with simple green, or not simple green. I soaked it in Evaporust and cleaned it with a wire wheel, and then I just sprayed it with some metallic Rust-Oleum just to keep it from re-rusting. I do that with most of my stuff. In the cabinet itself, you can see I have kind of polished out that little plate and installed that. It's got all new ground braid throughout, and I just follow the ground braid as I go. I think I did shoot a video of that I'll have in here. The power box here, I did not really mess with. I cleaned up the top just a little bit. The prop bar, I just cleaned up with my 3M combi wheel. Continuing the tour of the inside, that was all just cleaned up. I reinstalled that particular relay board, and the little mesh back there was soaked in Evaporust and cleaned up and reinstalled. I'm going to get another speaker for it, so I haven't messed with the speaker yet. The tilt here, I didn't really mess with much. I just reinstalled it. These are new flipper buttons, which I'll show you on the outside. The flipper switches I kept. I just cleaned off the contacts and cleaned them up with a little wire or brass brush on my Dremel. There's your start button switches. So that's kind of the inside there. Obviously, I've reinstalled the harness as well. This is the display harness, so I don't have that connected yet. I cleaned and installed this. I didn't have to repaint this, which was nice. I was able to just clean it with some simple green and it came out pretty nice. So I'm leaving that as is. These will all be replaced with LEDs eventually, but I haven't done that yet. The wheel was just cleaned with simple green. And we'll open it, show you the inside. So these were all reinstalled after being washed with warm soapy water and scrubbed down with just a little scrub brush just to get all the dirt and junk and dust and whatever off. I did all of the routing of the wires again and kind of set all that together so that it's back in its little spots. I may do a little bit of tidying up. I do still have to, I forgot to change out that, so I'll actually do a little video on doing that. And everything else in here was just kind of cleaned, like the back glass lock mechanism was just cleaned and reinstalled. I did remove that back mesh plate and soaked that in Evaporust, cleaned it, reinstalled it. Over here, this has all been brushed, or not, used my 3M combi wheel to just kind of polish it up, get rid of any rust that was on there, reinstalled all of that. If you look over on the, let me zoom out here. On the head, that's the original lock. I just polished it with my polishing wheel and reinstalled it. I don't know if you can see, maybe. So if you look at this sheen, okay, this is kind of why I like to polyurethane, even though it's a pain in the butt, because you can see the step off is not nearly as noticeable. And remember, that was matte, right? The green, and the white was matte, and now it's all the same sheen. So it just kind of brings your art together more and makes it look nicer. Here's the side of the cabinet. Oh, here, I'll show you the back first. So the latch was redone. I had a buddy of mine make me new stickers. Sticker there and a sticker there. So those are new. I put in new feet. Although on these machines, it always sits on this stupid latch anyway. I'm not gonna rescreen this. I don't think it's worth it, honestly. Okay, side. See if I can get the sheen here so you can kind of see it along the side. So it came out pretty good with the poly. Again, you don't really see in this light. I mean, it takes a pretty bright light and exactly the right angle to see any issues. You'll see I did the little detail of painting this bolt. This is the bolt that your playfield sits in on the other side. So when you bring the playfield up to work on it, it sits in here. So I painted that green and then just cleared it with some Rust-Oleum clear. So now that kind of goes away in the art. Mr. Clown came out pretty good. I'm happy with my little multicolor experiment that I did, even though it was a pain in the buttocks to do. Let's go around to the other side. On this side, kind of more of the same. Let me see if you can see the side rails came out pretty nice, actually. I'm really happy with those. And the install went well. Those are brand new flipper buttons. I'm going to try and light them, I think, if I get time and I feel like I want to do that at the end. Keeping going. Again, painted bolt there. And then on this side, I had to get a little bit creative because this side has bolts that hold in the hinge mechanism on the other side. So these are easy. I just painted them white and then cleared them with clear. This one here, I painted red. This one I got creative with, and I painted it red and then kind of taped off and painted black over the top of it and cleared it. So it kind of goes away. It's not exactly perfect, but you don't see it that much when you're walking up, as much as it would have been had it just been black or silver or whatever. So that came out really well. I'm actually really happy with this paint job, honestly. So that is where we're at. Okay, how to rebuild a connector. So what I do is I buy these Molex connectors in the longest size they have, which is I think like 23 or something, and I just cut them down to what I need. It's easier to do that than trying to buy 4s and 6s and 7s and 9s and whatever else you need. So I just cut it off. So I need a 4. So the first thing is there's 2 different sizes of these, so you make sure you get the right one. And I just buy both sizes, and so that way I know I've got enough. And they're not expensive; these are super cheap. So just make sure you got the right one. And I'm just going to use my Dremel tool with a plastic cutoff wheel, so you can see that. And we're going to cut this off. Okay. Now we're going to take a little sanding drum, Dremel sanding drum, and we're just going to clean up the edges here so it's a little prettier. And now we have a 4 opening connector ready to go on the machine. All right, tools that you need to do this job. You need a connector that has been trimmed, as we just did. You need the pins, okay? There are two sizes. These are 0.156, which is the correct size for these smaller gauge wires. If you have the larger connectors, you're going to use bigger wires. See, that just broke apart. All right, you need wire cutters. I highly recommend a set of wire strippers. Makes your life a million times easier. And you need a crimping tool that is specifically for the wire gauge that you're working with, okay? So what I do is I take a connector, I load it into the tool, click it once so it grabs it like that. Now that's ready to go, okay? Now what we're going to do, we're going to cut these wires. Wow, thing is just disintegrating. Roasty toasty. So cut the wire, strip the wire, okay? And now you're going to take your preloaded connector, put the wire in, and you want the wire to the plastic jacket to actually seat. You kind of got to push on a little bit so it seats inside the connector like that. Squeeze till it goes all the way, release. Pop out your newly installed connector and give it a tug and just look at it. So what you want is you want the plastic to be captured in the first set of crimps and the wire to be captured in the second set of crimps like that. Now, what you need to do is make sure that your orientation is correct. So look at your old connector, and this goes this way, okay? So now we know that this was the first pin. So you're gonna put it in, and there's a little keeper pin on here that goes in the slot. That locks it in. You just push it in until you hear it click like that, and now it's in there. So that's number one. All right, so there we go. Rebuilt connector that can now go in its spot. All right, here's our installed new connector. You can see this is a board, so these mirror each other, so that's easy. If you ever get confused, just make them look the same. So you just go straight across. You can see that I put in new header pins as well, because these were both really toasty. I think, my guess is those are power to the flashers. And with this thing going on a lot, or being on a lot in an arcade or whatever, there was just a lot of voltage going through there. And it burnt them up. But now they're better.